Good morning, good afternoon. I think it's more morning. Good afternoon, maybe if you're in Europe. But this is Anto Gutierrez, and welcome to the third webinar that we've organized around GridWeek. That's coming up in about 4 weeks now, less than 4 weeks, October 2nd to 4th. We don't actually have any slides. What we've done in the past webinars is just to use the website to navigate around the agenda and around the various sort of key topics that we are covering at GridWeek. Obviously, the website is available to you to see everything. The structure of this webinar is that once we start the webinar and give some introductions, we'll actually spend a bit of time on each of the 9 tracks of the conference, and we have most of the track leads available on this webinar, and we'll ask each of them to spend a couple of minutes each to describe the tracks that they are leading and have put together, the objectives behind them, and a little bit about each of the sessions and what we're trying to cover in each of those sessions, and why this is important for GridWeek, for the agenda of GridWeek. At the end of going through all of the different tracks, we have some time available for Q&A and discussion. If you have any questions, please post them on the tool, on the GoToWebinar tool, and we'll see them and we'll address them at the end. If you have any urgent questions, just shoot them over on the Q&A tool as well. We are recording this webinar, and once we're done with the webinar, we'll put this on the website so you can send your colleagues to it. And obviously, we hope to see you at GridWeek itself, because this is just in preparation of GridWeek in less than 4 weeks. So if I can start, a little bit of background. This is the 6th year that we've organized GridWeek, started in 2007. It was created as a collaborative conference for all of the different stakeholder groups involved with smart grid and grid modernization. So we're very excited to have as our partners these organizations that you see listed here as our major partners. And most of these organizations form the advisory board, which is the entity that's put together the agenda and each of the tracks. One of the first things that we did when we started to put together this year's agenda is to think about the theme and to think about the issues that's facing the industry today, or this year. And as we did that back in January of this year, the 2 themes that kept on cropping up was, needing to talk about the value proposition and what is the value of smart grid to all of the stakeholders, utilities, consumers, society, vendors, everybody. And how do we explain the value, and how do we actually discuss the value proposition and value sort of to the new business model, etc. The other thing that kept on cropping up is the complexity of smart grid, of grid modernization. Complexity from a technology perspective, from a business model and business structure perspective, business change, and also complexity from a policy and regulatory sort of perspective. So out of all of that, we came up with a theme of value achieved from complexity, which is really trying to encapsulate all of those issues into one sort of theme. And what we've done is, in each of the 3 days, we've actually focused on 3 specific elements of that. On Tuesday, we focused on the value sort of discussion. On Wednesday, we focused on the complexity, or what we call taming complexity. And on Thursday, we kind of wrap it up with a discussion about what we call smart policy. How do we sort of come out of all of this and with a sort of new way of thinking about the value and about taming complexity. So that's the background. The agenda page of the website gives you the overview agenda for the whole conference. It's basically over 3 days. We have a plenary each morning, and then it breaks up into 3 sessions. So I'm going to start with the first track, which is a track that we call Big Drivers for Value. So if I can ask Paul Molitor from NEMA to introduce himself and spend a couple of minutes to talk about what's behind the idea behind this track. Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Anto. I'm talking. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. So we aren't having the same technical difficulties we had last time. Well, first of all, NEMA is proud to have been a managing partner here of GridWeek ever since it started several years ago. So this is a very key part of our strategy, and we're happy that you're considering it to be part of yours. The idea about this track, it's exactly what Anto said. It's the drivers for value here. And if you take a look at the things that we have going on, one of the big drivers, some of the most important announcements are coming out of the U.S. military. So we've organized this role of military and smart grid as one of the sessions, and that will focus on exactly what's going on military bases. They have a number of initiatives that include microgrids and local storage and local generation. So it's really, military bases are being encapsulated as individual smart grid entities. In the next session after that, we have the idea of nurturing the smart grid ecosystem. And if there's one thing we've learned over the last several years, it's the fact that we are all having to work in new ways together to make the smart grid happen. So that's exactly what this session is about. We've got it peppered with a variety of perspectives in terms of the smart grid ecosystem, utilities, manufacturers, a marketing firm, academics. It's a really good session, and it's really going to talk about the ways that we all are having to work together in order to achieve our objectives. And then the last session we have here is the global resource challenges for smart grid. And again, if you take what's in that the idea of nurturing the smart grid ecosystem and you look across the globe, then there are a variety of perspectives that we need to take into account, and the whole idea of the fact that the laws of physics don't change as you cross international boundaries. So what's smart here is going to be smart everywhere, and it's the idea of driving value across common systems across international boundaries. So that's all I have for the short version of this, and I look forward to your questions or your online comments.
Thank you, Paul. So if we move on to the next track, that would be, let's go to the showcase track, which is Thomas. Tony is from NRECA. He's not on this webinar today. But I do have Dean talk about the standards as a value multiplier as one of the sessions. The whole idea of this particular track is to showcase things that are proving value or proving the discussion of value. So standards being one of them. Dean?
Yeah, thanks, Anto. So this session is titled Standards as a Value Multiplier. So we want to talk, obviously about standards and making the business case for cost-effective implementation of smart grid devices and systems that can effectively interoperate with one another can be challenging. So and one way to do that is by way of standards. So this session will demonstrate examples of how a standardized approach will allow a cost-effective installation of smart grid devices and systems. So Dr. George Arnold from the National Institute of Standards and Technology will be moderating this panel. And we'll have folks on the panel, Brian Markwalter from the Consumer Electronics Association will be attending as a panelist. We're targeting, and we'll have someone from an IOU, also someone from Enrica. We want to focus in on how smaller utilities such as co-ops can leverage standards. We'll be looking at also the aspect of EV, electric vehicles, how that ties in with standards, and we'll have an international perspective. G. Sig Park from the Korean Agency for Technology and Standards will be on the panel as well.
Okay, thank you. Tony has actually joined us on the webinar. Tony, are you there?
Okay.
Tony? maybe not. Okay, so let's just move on. The second session on this track is a discussion about microgrids, and specifically microgrids, a comparative kind of discussion between microgrids in the context of a developed country, in other words, where there is an existing infrastructure, grid infrastructure, and also microgrid in the context of developing countries where there isn't necessarily a developed infrastructure. So how does that sort of compare? I think that's going to be a phenomenal discussion there, led by Terry Moan. And the third session on this track is the value of dynamic transmission. So we're talking about, those sort of issues on the transmission side of the equation. That's going to be led by Sandy Avvialotis. Sorry, I always have problems with his name. So that's the track that's actually going to be very interesting on really just showcasing the value discussion. And the third track on Tuesday is the value for utility business. There's a whole sort of stream of discussions about what this means to the utility business, and we have Chris Eisenberg from EEI who's leading that track. So over to you, Chris.
Sure. Thanks, Anto. This is Chris Eisenberg from the Edison Electric Institute, also known as EEI. We are the trade association represent the shareholder-owned electric utilities in the U.S. and abroad. Again, like NEMA, we are a longtime partner and sponsor of GridWeek, and it is also a big part of our getting our message out about the value of grid modernization and what utilities are doing at the center of that movement. So we have three sessions, as everyone else does. The first, and this track is, as Anto said, is really focusing on what utilities are doing and seeing and gaining from grid modernization. So the first session is really a focus on what new opportunities and businesses are utilities getting involved in off of this move to modernize the grid. So as you can see from the you can't really tell exactly what the panelists bring to this session, but we have David Owens from EEI as the moderator. We're going to have a focus on a couple different focus from each one of the panelists. We're going to have a consumer-facing focus. What are utilities doing or should be doing or looking into regarding that interface with the customer? We're going to have an international perspective focused mostly around electric vehicle infrastructure, utility ownership and operations. We're going to have a perspective from two utilities. One is Dominion here, not far from DC, that will focus on a new business that they developed called Dominion Voltage, which is basically taking the data and value from the smart meter deployment that they've done, and what can they do with that data and what they've decided to do as far as building a business around it. And that speaker will really focus on kind of what was the thought process behind that and how did it come to fruition. Another utility speaker will talk about energy storage and also solar business, rooftop solar that they're involved in and looking very heavily towards as they plot their strategy going forward. And the last speaker, from an environmental perspective, is going to provide a framework that they are working on centered around how utilities can be involved in the financing of energy efficiency investments. So more from a financial position than from investing in infrastructure position. The second session is really looking more deeply into what are the T&D side investments that utilities are doing in the area of grid modernization. And as everyone knows, with the government stimulus that we had a couple years ago, a lot of the focus was on smart meters. There are about 36 million meters out in the field now across, or either in the field or planned to be deployed, that is. With maybe by 2015, we're looking about 65 million meters, so almost a doubling in the next couple years. But what are we doing? What is the utility industry doing beyond just the smart meter deployments, and whether it's distribution automation and those types of things? And what's the value that data that's coming out of that, both on the smart meter side and the distribution automation side. What can be done with that? And then that segues into the final session, which will be really focused on that data, the amount of data, what types of data should be collected, some of the privacy issues that may be around it, and it's kind of a full circle, because I think if you look at what the value that the data may bring, that will get back to what are utilities looking at as far as new opportunities and new revenue streams beyond just selling kilowatt hours. So again, like Paul, thank you for your time, and look forward to any questions from the callers or online.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. Moving on to the Wednesday part of the agenda, and let's get to the drivers to tame complexity. So on Wednesday, the whole sort of theme of it is how to tame this complex beast that we have in smart grid. And the drivers part of it is kind of the big picture sort of discussion is being led by Dean Prohaska from NIST. And Dean, hand it over to you and tell us about the cell track.
You bet, Anto. Thanks a lot. So, when we look at the smart grid, many times we refer to this as a system of systems, and has a high degree of capability as well as complexity. And when you start thinking about the smart grid, you can kind of look, on one end, you've got the generation, and then you've got the transmission, and then you go into the distribution, and all the way to the end consumer. And you start looking at this, and these things have to really interoperate from one end all the way through to the other end. So again, we think we're going to need a lot of multiple technology solutions to tame that complexity. So this track's going to describe how, what are the drivers that can enable the solutions and the technology to tame the complexity of the smart grid development and deployment. So again, we have 3 sessions, and so our first session is really dealing with the power of a well-coordinated initiative. And again, this session will describe how a successful initiative could be created and launched. And so our aim really here is to provide stakeholders in the smart grid ecosystem kind of the how to create an initiative that could then be leveraged over into the smart grid side. And again, thus accelerating the smart grid development and deployment. So again, the first session will be moderated by Stephen Minahan from Lux Research, and we have folks from the federal government that will be participating in this. We have a consultant. We have the state, someone from the state side as well, Nancy Ryan, and we have Brendan Owens from the U.S. Green Buildings Council. So we'll be talking about examples of how they've developed successful initiatives. So the next session is on transportation and renewables. And again, we've taken a look here, and we think that 2 big drivers that really haven't reached their full potential yet are plug-in vehicles and renewable generation, such as wind and solar. So this session will explore the technological challenges with integrating PEVs and renewable generation into the grid, including lessons learned from other countries that are working on these issues as well. Again, we're looking at Mark Duvall from EPRI will lead this panel. And so we have an electric Muni will be participating on the panel. We'll have an IOU, a couple of IOUs, and then we'll be having someone from Japan talk about their experiences in this area as well. And let's see here. The next session is on smart cities, gas, water, and critical infrastructure. So I think this is a very interesting session here. Making the business case for cost-effective implementation of smart grid devices and systems that can effectively interoperate with each other can be rather challenging at times. So this session will demonstrate some examples of how a standardized approach would be allowed. So this session will explore the challenges with integrating PEVs and renewable generation into the grid, and including lessons learned from other countries such as Japan. So that's pretty much it, I think. Did I miss anything?
No, that's it.
I think that's it. So I look forward to entertaining your questions now or later on.
Okay, thank you, Dean. Moving on to the next one, I'm going to jump to Taming Utility Complexity, which is being put together by Mike Oldak. Mike Oldak is with UTC. Mike, could you explain what's behind this? Go ahead.
Thank you, Anto, and UTC also has, or I have been working on GridWeek for quite a number of years. With UTC, we're looking at the communications networks and the challenges of taming utility complexity, because we're moving from that single central station to millions of devices at the end of the network. The first panel that we look at is the changing face of energy demand. And while we used to have simple relays on air conditioner compressors, those technologies are all changing with variable speed compressors. There's a lot of capabilities with two-way communications to these devices. So this panel will focus on the changing face of energy demand and what the producers our vendors are out there providing for utilities and how we bring these two together. The second panel looks at, again, the business and regulatory challenges for utilities. I remember, I guess at the beginning, people used to say, the smart grid, it costs too much, don't do it. And my response was always that no utility is going to do this unless the regulators find that the value to consumers exceed the benefits. But we've seen a lot of other challenges to smart grids, some based on science and some not. Recently there's the RF concerns from the smart meters, fires from the smart meters, privacy, a lot of challenges to the basic regulatory and business models that utilities are using. And so this panel will look really at those challenges and see how we've got several former state regulators on there, how they will address and how they are addressing those challenges to the smart grid deployments. And the last panel, cybersecurity and risk management. The big elephant in any room these days is cybersecurity and risk management. How do we protect our networks? Can we protect the networks? Is it a plan for making the network bulletproof, or do we figure that there will at some point be a cyber intrusion and that we have to plan for risk management and how to stop the intrusion and bring the system back up? So these are, I think, three really important panels that reflect what's going on in the industry today.
Mike, there's a question from one of the attendees on how can home automation technology get involved in this space. I asked it to you right now because I know that you have to leave before the end of the webinar, and also you.
Oh no, that's actually a great question, one that UTC's Energy Management Committee has been working on. Home area networks are something that lots of utilities are looking at, and I think part of the equation here is, follow the money. If you try, I think one of the problems is people believe that they can put a home area network in someone's home and it will pay for itself. I really question that for a lot of utilities. We've got some utilities that have flat rates. I'm not sure what you can do in a home that can lower the rates. If you want to do time of use, that's great too, and there's a lot of money there, but mostly that's a setback thermostat or a setback dishwasher. I think the real value in home area networks is expanding that beyond the home and integrating that with the utilities, with the third-party demand response providers, with the wholesale markets, and that's really where the value is. I think so much of what we've seen of the basic benefits for smart grid has been the ability to avoid or at least defer huge infrastructure investments. but that's sort of one's at the wholesale level or at the generation level, but I think there's also the ability of home area networks related, integrated in with the distribution networks to provide huge value for the utility that can be shared with consumers as we move to more distributed energy resources. You've got a whole area with lots of solar panels and a cloud comes by and the voltage drops significantly. Rather than having spinning reserves, you turn off the water heaters in the same region and keep it as a localized issue. So I think there is a huge value in integrating customer appliances and devices into not only the wholesale markets but into the distribution networks also.
Thank you, Mike. That's great. So that's again another great track. I think you'll see, from all of this, all of the effort in putting together these tracks of really putting together 9 outstanding tracks from a richness and relevance point of view for Smart Grid today. Moving on to the next track, which is what we call showcasing taming complexity. So again here, the theme is taming complexity, and let's talk about how we can actually showcase what's actually going in the process of doing that. Eric Gunther is unfortunately not here. He's actually here. He can hear us, but we have technology problems and we can't quite figure out how to make him heard by all of us. So I'm going to be Eric for now. So the first session, I think you've heard the term or the concept of a system of systems, and one of the reasons why a smart grid is very complex is because there's lots of stuff in it, and each of the areas, such as transmission or generation or the home automation, themselves make up a system. So smart grid is really a system of systems, a connection of all the different systems. So the first session here is a discussion of a system of systems, moderated by Eric Gunther himself. We have Ludwig Karg from Germany and Ron Melton and a couple of other speakers that's still being finalized right now to talk about this really very interesting sort of way of looking at it. The second session is on managing cybersecurity and privacy. This is a little bit different to the session that Mike Holdak was talking about, which is really focused on the risk management side of it, which is kind of the business impact side of cybersecurity and this whole sort of security subject. Here we're really talking about the technical aspects of the showcasing what's being done, and also the relationship between cybersecurity and privacy, which obviously is a very key subject in smart grid. And the third session, which we're still working on, is another very important aspect. I think everybody knows in the electric sector, job number one, the top priority of every single utility or anybody involved in the electric system is to ensure reliability. So how does this impact, or what kind of stories and experiences can we talk about in terms of how a smart grid has improved, obviously, reliability? There's a lot of discussion here about who to actually have on this panel, and we're working with NERC and other organizations to put this together. It's again, this is going to be a very important session. Again, part of a really good track that Eric is working on. So that's that one on Wednesday, and I think we've covered all of the ones on Wednesday, and we'll move on to the drivers for smart policy. So on Thursday, as I mentioned earlier, the whole sort of theme, the sub-theme for Thursday is smart policy. So having talked about value and having talked about taming complexity, let's now talk about how do we sort of put this together in terms of smart policies and smart strategies about moving forward in the smart grid space. So the first session, I think, is going to be a phenomenal session that has been put together by Ivy Wheeler from NERUC. Ivy is on the call. So Ivy, do you want to just explain what's behind the thinking behind this session?
Sure. Hello, everybody. We're just going to look at how state and federal agencies can work together in promoting regulations in order to advance the smart grid. We have an all-star lineup of speakers. Sudine Kelly is our moderator, and as a former FERC commissioner and state commissioner, I think she's going to have a lot to offer. We have another former commissioner, Nancy Ryan from California, a FERC commissioner, and Progress Energy's Becky Harrison, which they have made some really interesting investment choices using VoltVar. They've decided to upgrade their distribution networks instead of their generation. And I want to explore what sort of regulatory reforms have allowed for this. That's kind of what we're going to be talking about. Let me know if you have questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ivy. So the second session in this track, Miriam Horn is not on the call. She's the track leader from EDF, the Environmental Defense Fund. She is under the weather today. She was on earlier on our call. The second session of this track is a discussion on smart grid and its role in the new air quality requirements. So obviously this is on the backdrop of the environmental sort of dialogue that's going on with energy globally, or sort of in the big picture, but there's specific issues regarding air quality with the new air quality requirements. How does smart grid help with this? This session is being moderated by Susan Tierney, formerly of EPA, and now with the analysis group, and Jamie Fine from EDF, and we're actually working to secure 2 or 3 other speakers from EDF and from EPA and other organizations and utilities, and just working to confirm that right now. But this is going to be again another important subject. The last session of this track is specifically on privacy, and specifically a discussion about privacy, as it were, in the age of Facebook and Google. Obviously, privacy is a very important subject for smart grid, but privacy is something that we deal with and we actually work with every single day in our lives, you know, on Facebook and Google and other sort of internet-based technologies and companies. So how does that relate to the discussion of privacy in smart grid? So that is the drivers for smart policy track on Thursday. And moving on to the next one, which is smart policy for utilities. This is being put together by Drew Bennett from the Department of Commerce, International Trade Administration. Over to you, Drew.
Thanks, Enzo. Yeah, the International Trade Administration of the Department of Commerce has been a partner of GridWeek for a number of years, and this year expanding that partnership to include GridWeek as part of our international IBP.
Buyers program.
The International Buyers Program, which is run by our commercial service, and they recruit delegations from around the world to bring to trade shows and conferences in the U.S. This year, recruiting has been active in Mexico, Canada, Brazil, Turkey, parts of Africa, and the Middle East. So participants in GridWeek this year can look forward to utilities from a number of countries around the world being present. And as part of the Smart Policy for Utilities track, we're kind of scoping out to that global perspective to first start off with a panel on gas and renewables and the future energy system run by Harry Forbes of ARC Advisory Group. And again here trying to get to the big macro drivers that are impacting global energy policy and the strategy that utilities will need to take on. And so we have some global perspectives on this first panel from New England to Canada to Japan, and then getting to the second panel to look at the utility strategies in this context of global change in energy industry through things like natural gas and renewables and the responses to it by utilities, and in terms of implementing smart grid solutions in that context. We have Chris Hickman from Innovari, again with a lot of experience working with utilities from the Middle East to India, and from India, Reggie Kumar, and then a perspective from Russia, which will also contrast and compare with perspectives from the U.S. as Irina Volkova has undertaken a study on Russia's utility systems and smart grid implementations and compare them to the U.S. So this panel will give global perspective on the macro issues impacting the energy industry and on the utility responses to those issues around the world.
Thank you, Drew. Again, that's going to be an interesting track on Thursday. So moving on to the last track, which is the Smart Policy Showcase. Again, this is the showcase part of the day where we're highlighting some of the things that's been going on in this case on smart policy. So first one is a discussion on Green Button. I think most people would be familiar of the concept of Green Button and the initiative that was launched by Anish Chopra last year at GridWeek. That is the mechanism for utilities to provide energy usage consumption information to consumers. It has moved a significant way along in terms of adoption by utilities. There's now 31 million consumers that are able to gain access to Green Button data, which is phenomenal considering it's only been around for about a year, really, in terms of deployment. So this panel is really going to have a discussion about where we are with the Green Button initiative and what's next and what to expect. I think that's going to be a tremendous sort of discussion on this subject. The second session is really what's going on, what's been happening in the consumer engagement side of things, especially focusing on the social media. This is being put together by Patty Durand from the Smart Grid Consumer Collaborative, and they were formed, I think, about 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago, to actually tackle this whole sort of consumer engagement perspective. So expect a really good discussion there from a broad range of panelists, from utilities to social media experts and vendors involved in the space. The last session is specifically on automated demand response. As a couple of people, I think Mike Oldak was talking about earlier, demand response, or influencing the demand to behave in concert with supply, is a big thing, a big part of smart grid, and automated demand response as being a technology that's been evolving for the last 3 or 4 years. We now have an OpenADR alliance which has been created to formalize and to adopt and to implement what is called the OpenADR standard. So this session is being put together by Barry Haase, the Executive Director of OpenADR Alliance. So far we have LBNL and Heather Sanders from California ISO, and there'll also be a couple of other utility players in here and somebody from an international perspective that's not been finalized. So there was a question online about OpenADR, whether it's going to be covered in this conference, and here it is. And this will be a pretty strong sort of update specifically on OpenADR 2.0, which is the standard that will actually be widely deployed. So that is the last track. That is the 9th track. As you can see, there's a lot of really strong material in the agenda. I just want to touch on the plenary sessions. In each morning we have plenary sessions. So we have, if I go here and go up here, we'll see the structure of this. On Tuesday morning we have Tom Graham. Maybe Chris, you can comment on Tom?
Sure. Tom Graham is the president of the local utility here in DC, PEPCO, which is a subsidiary of PEPCO Holdings, which operates in Delaware, D.C., Maryland, New Jersey, under various subsidiaries. Tom is obviously the host utility for GridWeek, and they have been obviously for the last, since 2007, since GridWeek has been in D.C. What he's going to touch up on is how their smart meter deployment and their smart grid deployment helped them and their customers get through that freak storm. Now we all know a new word, a Spanish word called derecho, that the storm that began in Indiana right before at the end of June and into July, and moved its way eastward and just created total destruction and havoc throughout the mid-Atlantic states. In fact, I had a tree hit my roof, and it just got it repaired about 2 weeks ago. So I'm interested to hear what Tom has to say about how smart meters and smart grid helped Pepco, become more productive and in their outage management and restoration efforts. I think it's a great story to tell, and he'll be doing that. And then I don't know if you want to talk about the panel or
Go ahead.
Yeah, then the panel, which will be on Tuesday morning, will have some of the major leaders in utility and smart grid area. Evan Gaddis, who's the president of NEMA, who Paul Molitor, who you heard first to kick off this webinar, he represents. Tom Kuhn, my ultimate boss here at Edison Electric Institute. Terry Moan from General Microgrids, who actually is probably somewhere in the world right now helping some country look at the microgrid strategy that they're pursuing. We also have is he the head of the BPA? I'm not sure his title. I can't see it from me.
SVP.
So Senior Vice President from Bonneville Power Administration, which is one of the major sponsors of GridWeek, and they're going to tell the story from their perspective on what value is derived from smart grid modernization, those types of things.
And we expect a couple of other speakers on this roundtable. These plenary roundtables have been really one of the greatest sort of discussions that we have at GridWeek. And then on Wednesday, we have the keynotes. We have two keynotes. The first keynote is by Mickey McManus, who's written a book about trillion devices. Basically, the fact that the world will have, over the next few decades, not just millions, not even billions, but we're actually talking about trillions of devices. If you think about everything from consumer devices all the way up to generation and transportation and everything else, and they're all going to be connected with each other. So it's kind of like, in the context, again, Wednesday is taming complexity. In the context of how to tame complexity, you really need to think about the enormity of this number. I mean, it is a huge number. So how do you even think about managing a trillion devices or even a billion devices? It's quite frightening. So the second keynote is Pat Gallagher from NIST, and so again he's going to be looking at the taming complexity discussion from a standards perspective, as Dean was talking about earlier. And then following that, we have a roundtable on taming complexity with a number of speakers that I won't go through specifically right now. It's on the website. Again, just a general discussion about how we're going to tame this complexity. Again, technology, business, and policy complexity. Moving on to Thursday, we have the Smart Policy keynote by David Sandlow from the Department of Energy. He is the Undersecretary for Energy, as well as the Assistant Secretary for Policy and International Affairs, so he's going to bring in the international perspective, followed by a roundtable on smart policy with we'll probably end up with about 4 or 5 speakers moderated by Lee Cravath from San Diego. So that's the plenary sessions. I just want to touch on one other thing that we announced this week, which is the recognition that we are doing at GridWeek of 3 key initiatives that's going on in the industry, and that is Pecan Street, SGRP, and Green Button. So maybe I can just briefly talk about Pecan Street, and maybe others can talk about some of the other initiatives. Pecan Street, I've been aware of Pecan Street ever since I got involved in Smart Grid back in 2007-ish. It started off as a sort of an offshoot of the Austin Energy sort of efforts to think about Smart Grid. And they've done enormous amount of work in the past 5 years to further the sort of understanding and experimentation and research and development of Smart Grid. And it's really very fitting that they be recognized at GridWeek as part of the sort of value discussion on Tuesday. Really very happy to do that, and we're looking forward to working with Pecan Street guys to have a discussion around that. On SGIP, Dean, do you want to do that?
Yeah.
Or Paul Molitor can comment in as well?
Yeah, I could talk about that. Yeah, so the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 charged NIST to coordinate and accelerate the smart grid standards development. And as part of that, NIST created this multi-stakeholder group back in November of 2009. And it's very interesting. This organization, it's only been around for a few years, right? We now have over 750 organizations and nearly 1,800 individual representatives in that organization. So they've really been helping NIST fulfill our ESA role. So a very, very important organization, and in fact responsible for coordinating a lot of the activities that have led to the Green Button is one example. And we've created now a catalog of standards. We have a lot of different working groups in terms of security and testing and certification. So we're really excited to see this group be recognized, and it's kind of in a year of where it's going to be transitioning from a public-private organization to a government-funded to a private-public organization with this continued involvement in that. So it's a perfect time to recognize this organization.
Thank you, Dean. Paul, do you have anything to add to that?
No, actually, that was a good summary. Maybe one little thing. The unique thing about taming complexity that the SGIP has been able to offer is that they have brought a variety of standards development organizations together in order to be able to do the standards for smart grid. So it's been really a monumental effort in terms of getting 22 individual bears into the same room and having them work together on standards.
And I should point out, too, that what I think is also interesting about this group, Anto, not only does it focus on the U.S. effort of smart grid, but it includes an international perspective as well.
Okay. Thank you. And the third initiative that is being recognized on Thursday, again, Thursday is the theme is smart policy, is the Green Button. And I don't know, I think out of this group, I don't know, Chris, if you want to make some comments on Green Button, and maybe Paul as well. Or...
Well, I mean, many of the utilities that have embraced the Green Button approach are member companies of EEIs, whether they're in California, Texas, or on the East Coast here. It's something that obviously gained a lot of traction in California because there was a regulatory imperative to do so from California's point of view. But I see that I think that utilities are embracing it. As I think when they announced it in March of this past year, there was 15 million customers, and it doubled in less than 6 months or something like that. But utilities are going to look at it. How does it fit in their existing customer engagement data provision kind of framework? And it's going to be probably a utility by utility decision. But I think with more recognition, more promotion, more and more utilities will be providing this data. they provide this data already, I mean, in many different forms, but it's really just a standardization approach. And you know, I see the green button having a very bright future going forward.
Okay. Anybody want to add to that? From here. Okay, so moving on, that's basically the agenda and the structure and the theme, and highlighting the recognition. Be open to some questions, or we can just continue the discussion. One of the questions I see online here is how can this forum be useful for grid suppliers and suppliers of renewable energy products? Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I think that one of the panels that is in my track is dealing with renewables and the integration of those renewables. So clearly talking about success stories or challenges or faults, I think that suppliers of that kind of equipment can take a look at that and learn from some of the success stories or from some of the challenges and craft and develop their products to fulfill some of those gaps. So that might be one example.
And the other thing is just think about this sort of trillions of devices, in other words, enormous number of devices that all need to be connected with each other, and obviously renewable devices is part of that, or the renewable equipment is part of that. So I would argue that it's very much part of smart grid to actually include renewable energy products in this discussion. Any other comments on that? Paul, do you have any comments from an EMA perspective? Are you there, Paul? Okay.
Darn the mute button yet again. Yeah, I mean, the integration of new resources is it's a function of standards and technologies, and what we're doing, it's the opportunity to bring those together in order to form a graceful path to get them integrated into the grid. That would be the only thing I would have to add.
Okay, thank you. So, any more questions from the audience, or anybody in this group want to sort of highlight anything that we've missed? Why don't we talk a little bit about the international side of things, Drew? I mean, you mentioned the IBP. One of the things that we've tried to do in putting together this agenda is to include an international perspective in all sessions. I don't think we're quite there yet. Do you want to sort of comment on that and comment on?
Yeah, I think we're close there, but I think just the focus on international that GridWeek's going to have this year, reflects, I think, one trend in the industry, and also is indicative of the value that GridWeek can bring to the industry. As there's been some kind of leveling out of the hype cycle, I think, for smart grid in the United States. But around the world, that's not the case in every market. And we've seen great interest from the perspective of the International Trade Administration and our worldwide work from countries, like I was saying, in Africa and in South America, where we've seen in other technology businesses and other technology cycles that really take a lot longer in these developing markets. But because of the dynamics of the global economy and because of the reduced cost of a lot of these technologies and because of the need for it in countries where electricity consumption is really on the rise like it has been in no other era, I think you're seeing a lot more interest in the smart grid in a range of countries, and many will be represented at GridWeek. And we'll have a speaker like David Sandalo, who has a deep experience in policy to facilitate energy technology development. And with wearing so many hats at the Department of Energy now, will bring a lot of interest from these international speakers in hearing what he has to say on a policy level. And we'll be promoting some of these delegations and international utilities who will be present, and there'll be the opportunity to meet with them as well.
Okay, thank you. Chris, do you have any other sort of comments from a broad sort of utility perspective of what's going on in smart grid and how we're sort of positioning GridWeek to help that? Because again, the other key objectives that we had in terms of putting together the agenda is to have a utility in every session.
Right.
And we've done that. I think
Yeah.
we've achieved that.
Well, I mean, we represent, I believe, the implementers of the technology, the people that are, we're spending the money, whether it's, purchasing the equipment from our vendor partners, or making the investment and getting the return on investment. We're at the center of this grid modernization movement. One, from a policy point of view, what we've seen is that the focus is slowly shifting towards the local jurisdictions and the states. There was a big federal focus for the last couple of years with stimulus and a lot of the stuff that still will continue with the stuff going on with NIST and the SGIP. I think GridWeek is a great central location where you can get a lot of those perspectives of what's going on at various jurisdictions, state, local, from the implementers or the utilities that are putting this stuff on the grid. So,
great, thank you. And Paul, do you want to comment on it from a NEMA, from a vendor's perspective, as to what's going on in the industry and sort of what we've tried to do with putting together GridWeek this year? Mute button.
Yeah, look. Yeah, I had it off this time. Yeah, it's when you take a look at the industry from the manufacturing perspective, there is a broad base of interests, and it encompasses everything, not only from the NEMA perspective, the electrical manufacturing, but also when you start looking at software companies and other third-party vendors and people who will be participating in this smart grid ecosystem, which is ties back into that session that we had. So the whole idea of being able to generate generate sessions that would appeal across that entire broad base of industries is what we've tried to do. And of course, when we're shopping for participants, we look for people to come from each of those groups to try and be part of the panels, as well as academia and government and so on and so forth. So it ends up being we take a broad look at the industry in order to try and develop interest, and then structure the sessions around that so that they have the greatest appeal to the greatest number of people.
Great, thank you. Ivy, I see that you're still on the call here. Do you have any sort of closing comments from NARUC? Again, obviously another very important stakeholder group involved in smart grid.
We're looking forward to participating and bringing as many of our members as possible to participate as well. I look forward to it. No.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Ivy. And Dean, the last word. We're nearly out of time, but just from a NIST perspective, obviously a key organization.
Well, thanks, Anto. I think that throughout GridWeek this year, we're talking about kind of the value of what smart grid brings, and we're tying that into the complexity and how standards really helps tame that complexity. So that's certainly a key aspect for us as the standard side. Okay.
Well, we're pretty much out of time, and I do thank you all being on this webinar, and thank you the participants who actually put this together. And look forward to seeing you in Washington, D.C. October the 2nd. GridWeek.com is the website if you want any more information, and there are contact details there to get involved with the event. So with that, from Washington, D.C., I bid you farewell. Bye-bye.